A very well-known aspect of the political use of the internet has come especially from terrorist groups, and this became mostly known through Al-Qaeda and also through ISIS. The stories are pretty common of people being recruited via social media by ISIS. This one particular here from 2015, federal authorities in Minnesota announced that 6 young Somali Americans had been arrested for attempting to travel to Syria to join the self-proclaimed Islamic State, also known as ISIS. We're learning about how ISIS is attracting new recruits in the United States. And of course, this is through social media, through being connected by a internet link much more than anything else. Now, the background to all of this is obviously pretty murky because there's no information as to how people find other people through this, but you can imagine pretty easily that social media is greatly helping finding people that fit a certain profile. Maybe, for example, in the case of Somali Americans who may have Muslim last names, they would be easily found as a geographical search for a Muslim last name into a place like the United States. Very similarly, it might be easy to find through mosques and other places where people have a social relationship, of course. But once you have this amount of separation and the anonymity that we have mentioned previously that exists through social media, you might not know how the person is behaving on the other side. You might not know what their motives are, and you might not either be particularly interested in digging into it. And it makes sense that in this context, people might be perhaps tricked or perhaps pushed into a certain direction through the internet. And this has become a much larger problem with this article put out in Wired about why ISIS is winning the social media war. Because, of course, this is not just about instant messaging, this is also about the imagery that circulates on Twitter, for example, as it is pointed here, but also Facebook and any other kind of social media where you can have access to the entire world, and conversely, the entire world can have access to you. And this is something that becomes much more complicated than just the availability of ideas, because of course it is always easy to find ideas about anything. And again, you could find ideas about ISIS as much as you can find ideas about America in a bookstore or a library, and that much is not too different. The difference is that what is happening here is not just a matter of, again, circulating information, but also connecting specific types of information with very specific types of people, and perhaps, in a sense, profiling certain people in a way that is a lot easier to do through social media because you can understand the things that they are looking for. You are maybe find common points of interest between you and them, and you can also fake those points of interest, of course, to create connections that might not otherwise exist. So you can present yourself as a different person, you can present your interests as a different person if your goal is not just the social experiment of the internet, but rather the much larger political goal that your particular group may have. And the internet in this context is referring to something that was very well known at one point in technique and technology, which is narrowcasting. Narrowcasting is obviously perhaps the opposite of broadcasting, whereas, broadcasting in the early years of technology was not necessarily available because you could not broadcast as much as you could spread information to a group of people, but you could not use television, for example, or radio up until the 20th century. Once those techniques become more available, then we have the advent of broadcasting as we understand it. Before that, the idea was narrowcasting. Narrowcasting is, of course, broadcasting on a narrow scale. This is just broadcasting to a small group of people. This article here in Time, from Time magazine, again from 1926, talks about John Hayes Hammond, famed inventor. For some weeks past, I have been in Rome, during which time I saw Premier Mussolini presented him with a 5 kilowatt broadcasting outfit of the selective wave or narrowcasting type. Last week in my apartment in Palazzo Massimi, I was lighting an old-fashioned gas water heater when it exploded, severely burning my face, eyebrows, and hair. Although I am suffering considerable pain, I hope to be completely recovered in 2 weeks. This is a joke, obviously. This is part of a satirical part that existed in Time magazine. Nobody actually offered a specific narrowcasting machine to Mussolini so that he would be a better dictator. But the character as it is invented here is a person who has this newfound possibility of using information, and of course using that information in a specific way that they could spread for a person that has a very specific goal, in this case a fascist dictatorship in Europe. So John Hayes Hammond Jr. exists. The Palazzo Massimi exists, Mussolini exists, Rome exists. Most of the data in there is entirely possible, entirely viable. It just so happens that in this case, it is circulated in a way that is designed to be made fun of. Now, 20 years later, maybe people would remember this. 100 years later, as we are sitting now and looking at this particular picture, it might not be as clear that this is, in fact, an example of narrowcasting in itself. This is a story that is really designed for people who are in the know of technique, in the know of world events, in the know of the general context in which they are living, for which this story would be funny. Of course, they might not have known what was going to happen a few years later when it is not so funny, of course. Narrowcasting was at some point viewed as an actual scourge on broadcasting, because once it became possible to spread information on a much wider scale, it became kind of confusing why anyone might want to narrow their view of passing data. This particular article here in Billboard magazine, a journal slash magazine about popular media, is talking about the perils of narrowcasting in the case of independent radio stations that are catering to a specific audience rather than doing the thing that everybody was doing at that point, which was broadcasting. In other words, it was possible by the 80s to become a little bit more of a niche audience and to be able to pass information, music, arts, or whatever, not just to the greatest number, but just to be happily broadcasting it to the people who know the thing. And of course, this is the case for pirate radio, and this becomes the case increasingly for maybe radios that are more styled towards a certain audience, whether they are young or old, or maybe a regional audience or whatever. The actual end of broadcasting, as many people pointed out, it happens right around this time when you have cable TV. For example, MTV used to be called music television, of course. That's what MTV stands for. And MTV was one of the first broadly available channels that only catered to a specific group of people. In fact, in the 90s, of course, this was catering to cool people for the most part, not like what MTV is now. But the idea was that, of course, in this context, you could, if you just liked music, watch MTV all day and you would just see that. That was, as far as the industry was concerned, seen to be as a mistake. And of course, on the other side, people who do enjoy music saw that as a reward, as something that was going to benefit them greatly. Again, with the now 30 years that separate us from this article, you are kind of up to judge whether MTV was a good thing or a bad thing, and seeing especially what MTV looks like today. And the greater idea now with the internet that allows us to broadcast not just over airways, but over the entire world on the internet. Anyone has the example of the internet access, and anyone can have access to the data that is on the internet. But not everything is available to everyone. There are some sites that are available only if you log in. There are some sites that are available only if you pay. There are some sites that are only available if you fulfill a survey or whatever. Those things are, those types of websites tend to be seen as a form of narrowcasting. The fact that you can receive notifications on your phone is also seen as narrowcasting, where you can set your specific personal device to have a specific personal update about the thing that you are allegedly specifically interested in. So in this context here, narrowcasting is kind of experiencing a renewal in the internet. If you've ever been asked to be provided with those text notifications or email notifications on the website, this is really what this all comes down to. And this gets us back to the conversation that we had yesterday with 4chan. 4chan is based on its anonymous idea, allowed to everyone, accessible to everyone, but very quickly, smaller groups of people began communicating in very specific ways on 4chan. And it was, for a very long time in the 2000s, a way for people to find themselves that had a very specific form of interest. You have a lot of message boards on 4chan that are specific to music, specific to politics, specific to this or that. And sometimes you have messages within 4chan that really are understandable, mostly if you understand 4chan cultures. You see the codes that talk to you specifically, and you understand that some things are going to elicit a specific response. One thing that happened that became a lot more popular in the past 4 years has been these kinds of messages that are passing information about what is happening to HRC, aka Hillary Rodham Clinton. HRC extradition already in motion, effective yesterday, with several countries in case of cross-border run. Passport approved to be flagged effective 10:30 at 12:01 a.m. Expect massive riots organized in defiance and others fleeing to the U.S. to occur. USMs will conduct the operation while NG activated. M's being military, NG National Guard. Proof check. Locate an NG member and ask if activated for duty 10:30 across most major cities. So the proof for this particular statement, as you can see, dated 2017 of Hillary Clinton being arrested by the military, was easy to check. You just had to check in the real world if you knew somebody in the National Guard who had been activated for this very specific goal here. The goal of extraditing or preventing Hillary Clinton from fleeing the United States. And of course, we all know this did not happen. Hillary Clinton is happily living her life wherever she is. But if you think that this is within the realm of reality, if you do not need a second check by a National Guardsman member wherever they live to tell you that this thing have happened, you might actually believe that such statements are true. And of course, if you believe this is true, you can push that a little bit further to the other messages from this same person. Now, of course, this is again following a lingo that exists on 4chan mostly, but if you look at this number here, the ID is the ID number of the person who posted, kind of like I talked about yesterday with Bitcoin being anonymous. Yes, it is anonymous, but you have to be identified to know that this is a person. Well, same thing here. The name is anonymous, but you have an ID. Next post here, same ID number that posts more information about what is happening to HRC. Again, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Mockingbird, HRC detained, not arrested yet. Where's Huma? Follow Huma. Huma Abedin, of course, a weird character in the Democratic story. You don't need much information about this too much. This has nothing to do with Russia, yet why does POTUS surround himself with generals? What is military intelligence? Why go around the three-letter agencies? What Supreme Court case allows for the use of MI versus congressional assembled and approved agencies, MI being military intelligence? Who has the ultimate authority of our branch's military without approval conditions unless 90 plus in war conditions? What is military code? Where is AW being held? Why, etc., etc. Now, these posts are from the person that becomes known a little bit later in our history as Q from QAnon. And all of these questions being asked here are questions that are supposed to elicit engagement, of course. You ask those questions so that somebody responds. People need you to know that the things that you are doing are interesting. And of course, the only way that you could get those responses by Googling, by searching the answers, by looking for information about technical subjects that are probably a little bit more complicated than it might seem, but the information is readily available. So you can Google these things, and you can Google what HRC means. You can look up our rest. You can look up why POTUS does this and that, and you can look up all of this information and find the answers for yourself. The answers out of context, of course, of what these things means. And so within the context of this larger story here, we have a larger story that is being told of Hillary Clinton being not only arrested or detained or whatever it is, but a grander system that is happening as the internet tells us, rather than just these bits of information being posted on the internet. This works mostly through a system that is called backlinking. Backlinking is an important feature that most search engines follow, and it is noted here. A backlink count, the value of 1p is the number of links that 2p that appear over the entire web. We use to refer to this important metric. Intuitively, a page P is referred to by many pages. It's more important than one that is seldom referenced, as metrics treat all links equally. So this is a basic function of how most search engines work. They work through counting links, and especially backlinks. That is a link that is linking back to a page. Those links appear on search engines themselves. They also appear elsewhere on the internet. So more and more people link to a page, the more and more this page is going to be famous, countable, worth somebody's interest, and the more it is likely to show up on a search in a search engine. Every search engine works that way, whether it's Google or Yahoo. They just have different ways to think about that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, what that means in terms of the functioning of the search engines themselves. But this is how you get these informations about Q especially. So this is another message posted by Q in the newer forms of 4chan, but you get the idea. Sometimes you just can't tell the public the truth. You must show them. Only then will people find a will to change. Crimes against children unite all humanity. Cross priority line, question mark. Difficult truths. Signed, Q. By this point in 2020, Q is identifiable as Q, the name has changed and everything, but the idea remains the same. It asks questions, especially it asks the most important question here. Crimes against children unite all humanity. This is the point where Pizzagate conspiracy theorists have intersected with QAnon conspiracy theorists, and so therefore they see that people who are obviously revulsed by the idea of crime against children are going to be united. And so if you unite people over the idea that crimes against children are objectionable, and of course 99% of the world will agree with this, that increases the amount of people who will necessarily join their cause by being exposed to these ideas that everybody agrees with, and then maybe they will be exposed to these ideas that are a bit less agreed with in other ways, such as Hillary Clinton being arrested or President Trump being still the president or whatever it is. Now, this is also the way that ISIS works, by the way. If you look at ISIS social media, most of what they talk about is the great things that ISIS does, which is to build bridges and to fix the roads and to help people, the things that you would see ISIS under a good light. And every now and then you also get the little thing that tells you about how to hate a specific group or how to create a bomb or whatever other nefarious goals they might have. The same idea works here. That's the same idea that works for InfoWars, that proceeds to have ideas about aliens and stuff that is just generally weird and interesting, but also you also get to see a lot of information about white supremacy as a result of that, because you have the broadcasting area, the social media, the TV and whatever. You also have the narrowcasting area where people can pass on just tiny bits of information. Once again, little sips of things that you can get along with your big gulp to snack on and to, again, be exposed to these larger ideas that you may not be even aware of.